Welcome to Your Financial Advocate with Greg DuPont from DuPont Wealth Solutions. As a practicing advisor and attorney, Greg teaches pre-retirees how to reduce debt and taxes and save with less risk so they have more spendable income and plan their way to a better life. Join us for this journey where Greg draws on years of experience and guest experts to help listeners achieve more spendable income for retirement.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Financial Advocate. I'm Greg DuPont. Today I'm going to pick up where I left off in the last episode. In that episode I was talking about the fourth turning. I was talking about our own system, our society, and the way it cycles through times. And if you've listened to me over the last few years, you know that I'm very concerned about where we are headed, both from an economic, a political, as well as a sociological perspective, and how it affects most of my clients, most of my listeners, those people that are nearing retirement or in retirement. These next 15 years that we're heading into are going to be transformative. We just don't know how that's going to shake out. And so, I'm sharing with you some of the readings that I've got that are informing my decision, because these aren't just things that I've made up. These are things that are based in fact. We don't know when this will all happen. We just know that there are forces at play that are really beyond our comprehension and beyond our management. And I'm not talking about dark forces. This is not what this is about. This is just the reality, the ebbs and flows of humankind. And so, we just come out of the Memorial Day weekend, and hopefully you had a good barbecue with family or what have you. I did something a little different. I had my daughter over, and by the way, my daughter got engaged for the weekend, so it was a great weekend. But I had to temper it a little bit, so I read something that, it's a New York Times bestseller, but I'm sure most of you that are listening have not read. It's got such an uplifting title. The End of the World is Just the Beginning, by a fellow by the name of Peter Zeihan, Zeihan. I'm going to be quoting from Peter here in his book. But Peter is a well-known geopolitical analyst. And in his book, he goes through great detail to draw out what is happening on a global scale with regard to the demographic change of where we are. And what I'm going to do today is, Greg's book report is not necessarily going to be reading the book. Yeah, that'd be pretty boring. I know, but I don't want you to turn this out. I want you to listen to what I'm going to say. And I'm going to read from him a little bit, and then I'm going to give you my feelings, my flair on that, especially how it pertains to you and what you need to be doing for your future. Because this stuff is coming our way, folks. And the more that we can prepare for it, the more we can get the lifeboat ready, the more that we can weather that storm. So the core of Zeihan's book chronicles how after World War II, the U.S. made a deal, the Bretton Woods deal, and they became the global protectorate, most notably of shipping lanes. We have the world's undisputed number one Navy, and that Navy and that freedom of commerce through international waters benefited everybody greatly. He contends that this is a unique moment in time that has now run its course. Not only are we in the U.S. Pulling back in a little bit, but we're dealing now with forces that are beyond that. You see, globalization allowed everybody to kind of specialize. That was the whole idea economically, right? That if Germany was better making the widgets, they could make the widgets and they could ship out the widgets, and the cost of commerce was low enough that worked for everybody. And we kind of all have gotten, I'll say fat and happy, because what's happened as a result of increasing wealth, the increase of the international middle class, we've gone from an agrarian society where kids were tools, right? We had to have them as farmhands, to a mechanical society where kids still had that history, and there were enough agrarian families that there was still a reason, a nationally, internationally high birth rate, which has collapsed. And so there's statistics behind this. In the 2020s, birth rates, this I'm quoting from Zeihan here, birth rates are no longer simply dropping. They have been so low for so long that even the countries with younger age structures are now running low of young adults, the demographic that produces the children. As the already smaller 20-something and 30-something cadres age into their 30s and 40s, birth rates will not simply continue their long decline, they will collapse. And once a country has more older folks than children, the next horrible step is utterly unavoidable, a population crash. And because any country that begins this process is one that has already run out of young adults, these countries will never recover. So let's put that in some context. What he's saying here is, as a key element of population, GDP, and all that stuff, we have to have consumers, we have to have buyers, right? And we are in this spiral now. The U.S. is one of the countries, and this is the bright thing for us, one of the countries where it's not as bad as the other countries. But once we have more people that are living off the work of people that are working, then it becomes an unchangeable imbalance. And if you've listened to me, you know that I'm a long-term optimist on things. And I think that when we look at U.S. here, stateside, and internationally to some extent, this is where we're going to have this match of technology where we now are able to get even greater productivity with robotics. We don't need as many bodies doing the jobs that we used to replace some of that. But by and large, we have this international change where we have less people. There was a book in the early 1970s. I think the guy's name was Paul Ehrlich. It was a population bomb that had predicted that we would outgrow, meaning in human population, the capacity for the Earth to sustain. Well, now it turns out, because of economic forces, people with a higher standard of living having less kids, we now have the opposite problem. We do not have replacement of the people that are around. So this is something that we need to be watching out for, because if we're going to have an increasing GDP, if our stocks are going to increase, we need to have buyers. We need to have people throughout the country and throughout the world that are buying our products. And this not only applies to the U.S., but it applies to other countries as well. And this problem is everywhere. China, frequently pointed to as the boogeyman. Well, maybe, who knows? But here is the issue with China that people that use them as a boogeyman are not really wrapping their heads around or being maybe disingenuous about. China in 2022, again quoting Ehrlich, is the fastest aging society in human history. In China, the population growth story is over and has been over since China's birth rate slipped below replacement levels in the 1990s. That goes on. Nor will China die alone. The time-staggered nature of the industrialization process from Britain to Germany to Russia and northwestern Europe and Japan to Korea to Canada and Spain, combined with the steadily accelerating nature of that process, means that much of the world's population faces mass retirements followed by population crashes at roughly the same time. The world's demographic structure passed this point of no return 40 years ago. The 2020s are the decade when it starts to fall apart. Let that sink in. Now, I've quoted Ray Dalio many times in this show, and the impact that his book, Principles of a Changing World Order, have had on me and my thought process. He points to the same timeline. Recently, we were talking about the fourth turning is here. Same timeline. All these factors are coming together in a similar timeline. Yeah, nobody knows exactly when it happens, but Dalio chronicles how the economics of it, specifically our borrowing, are putting us to a cliff. Fourth turning, pointing out how our society here puts us in that same cliff point. And now we add this source that shows how internationally it's getting pushed to the same point. Now, one of the things that he goes into here that I'm not going to bother with in our conversation, because I really do suggest that you read this book, at least the first half of it. He points out how these developing nations that have this replacement rate problem, how destructive this is going to be to their economy, to their population, and by extension, how distorting that is going to be and how disruptive that is going to be in international trade. You know, when the smaller countries can't build enough infrastructure to grow out of where they are, and because of a decreasing amount of international trade, because the countries that have it are going to keep it, then there's prospects for strife and revolution and all those good things. So when we go on, I want to share that this is coming from Zeihan again. There are a few bright spots in this deepening gloom, but only a few. A precious few countries have managed a high degree of development while simultaneously avoiding a collapse in birth rates. It is a painfully short list. The United States, France, Argentina, Sweden, and New Zealand. And that's it. Even if politics aligned, even if everyone's hearts were in the right place, even if all the Americans, French, and Argentines, and Swedes and Kiwis wanted to put the rest of the world's needs in front of their own, the sheer scale of humanity's demographic turning means that all of them combined would not comprise nearly enough of a foundation to support a new global system. By most measures, most notably in education and wealth and health, globalization has been great, but it was never going to last. What you and your parents, and in some cases grandparents, assumed as the normal, good, and right way of living, that is, the past 7 decades or so, is a historic anomaly for the human condition, both in strategic and demographic terms. The period of 1980 through 2015, in particular, has simply been a unique, isolated, blessed moment in time. A moment that has ended, a moment that will certainly not come again in our lifetimes. So when I've talked to people and they say, hey, I'm good. I don't think I need to worry about my money. I think everything is going to be fine. My Fidelity guy has shown me my projections. It's going to grow at 6-7%, whatever. I asked them, are they aware of these changing tides in front of us? Are they aware that the time that's framed our perception of the market and what it does is potentially a historical anomaly? We talked in the last conversation about taxes and all that kind of good stuff, what that's going to look like. When we have fewer people generating the GDP of the country, ours and others, something has to give. The trillions of dollars that we have borrowed, how does that all get reset? I don't know. But I do know that once we get past this transition, which I do believe is between now and 2030 is when it's going to start, but Zeihan says 2040 maybe. Who knows? He knows more than I do, but he still doesn't know. And I sure as hope that I'm wrong. But what's that going to look like? What's it going to look like for you, especially if you're early on in your retirement age? Because we also have the blessing and burden that's going to come on the other side, which also will be there by 2030. Significant advances in health, in our ability to live longer. And as Zeihan points out, internationally, the shift to retirement from production is going to leave us without having enough workforce, U.S. and elsewhere. So perhaps we need to start thinking a little differently. Perhaps we need to recognize the blessings of our time. Perhaps we need to protect what we've got. There are ways. We've talked about that. We'll continue to talk about that. We just need to be aware that the status quo that we've grown accustomed to is ending. And we need to start talking to our families. What's this going to look like? Again, back to those people I talk to all the time that say, hey, I'm doing fine. My kids are doing fine. They've got great jobs. Good. What do? Are they dependent upon an international market? Are they dependent upon an older market? What are they going to do if they lose their job and they start needing to find another six-figure job in the future? See, most of the people I talk to that say, hey, my kids are great, they've got some money. That's who I work with. We've got our IRAs, 401ks that have $1 million and up. Good, great for you. But where the press has said for years that that money was going to be part of a unprecedented transfer of wealth, well, number one, I think you're going to live a lot longer than you think you are. Number two, if you don't live that long and you don't take some steps to fix it, then most of that's going to go to our government. See, right now, if it comes out from an IRA, 401k, you've heard me say this before, it's taxable income, taxed at the rate of the recipient as affected by that income. And after Tax Cut and Job Act, well, we're still going to have historically low tax rates. But as we deal with some of the economic changes, we start dealing with the need to raise more revenue. You see, we've been given this position of being able to print money because there has been international liquidity. When we start having the impact of some of the demographic shift that Zeihan talks about, well, it might not be as many buyers out there, not only for our goods, but for our number one good right now, the U.S. dollar. So things are changing, folks. We need to prepare ourselves. We need to prepare our families. And we need to be advocates for our own financial future. So until next time, maybe I will stop this little string of fact-based dark times, get back to a little bit more light times, but this is information that I believe you need to know so that you can make informed decisions about your future. Because, again, we get through this transition point, there's a big, bright future ahead. All the books I read, even the ones dark like this, point out a couple of key factors. And those key factors all point out to the USA, the North American corridor. We are unique in terms of our geography, our political strength and will, and what we are able to do is beyond comprehension in relation to anybody else in the world. USA. But we got to get our own people there first. So, till we meet again, take care, be well. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Your Financial Advocate. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of DuPont Wealth Solutions. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.